talk, and I'm going to start by suggesting that perhaps most people on listening today or listening whenever are going to say that it is right that we behave responsibly towards the environment, that it is right that we don't exploit people or animals as part of our tourism, and that it is also right that we look after the planet for generations to come. However, despite the fact that I'm sure most of us would agree with that and nodding our heads in agreement, the truth is that from my experience, I'm not seeing a massive amount of actual action in that area. There's some, it's true, but I'm not seeing a huge amount of action, and more does have to happen, which is a part of what we're going to talk about today. Now, although things are most definitely better than they were, there's no doubt about that, we are improving. The trouble is, so are the amount of tourists, they're increasing all the time. So there's a 49-fold increase in tourism numbers since the 1950s. And in terms of sustainability and responsibility, we're not keeping up with that increase. We are way, way behind. So we need to take more action, basically. And as food tourism people, we need to remember the fact that actually food and the production of food, that's whether it's the growing of crops, it's livestock, it's harvesting, it's the slaughtering, the transportation, the processing, the packaging, the sale, the disposal at the end, all of that kind of stuff, all the things that are involved in the various aspects of food production, actually makes food production one of the most environmentally damaging industries there is on the planet. It actually has higher CO2 emissions, for example, than the entire transport sector put together. That includes aeroplanes. So flying, actually, although definitely bad for our environment, pales into insignificance when we look at our food production. Plus, of course, with food production, there's the impact of pesticides on the environment and fertilizers. There's CO2 and methane emissions, there's pollution into groundwater and watercourses, the list goes on, and all of that is basically to produce food. Now, clearly, no, we're not going to stop eating, and no one's suggesting that we should stop eating, but we do have to change the way we eat, and we do have to change the way in which we produce the food that we eat. And that includes, obviously, what we're offering tourists, whether we're offering it our food as part of a bigger offering, or whether actually it's very specifically a gastronomic experience. We have to bear these issues of sustainability and responsibility in mind when we do that. Now, the wonderful thing about tourism is it can be a force for good, but it can also be a force for evil. And that's something that we also need to change, and responsibility is part of that. So as a force for good, tourism brings jobs, it brings economic development, it empowers women, it often aids in education and healthcare, educates visitors and fosters understanding between different cultures. But as a force for terrible evil, there's the exploitation of people, whether that's the workers within the actual industry or people who've been forcibly removed from their land to cater for tourism. There's the sexual exploitation of women and children. There's the wholesale destruction of habitats and entire ecosystems. The mass extinction of species, pollution of our rivers and oceans, CO2 emissions, destruction of ancient monuments, abuse of animals in captivity in the wild, trophy hunting. I could go on and on and on. And these are some of the bad, dark sides of tourism. So as tourism professionals, we have to be part of the solution, not just turn a blind eye to it and say, well, it's not really our problem. It is our problem. And the food that we eat is part of that problem. Now, even if you sat there and gone, yeah, but I don't care. It's like the ethics are not of interest to me. And I'm disappointed if that's how you feel, but if that's how you feel, then let me tell you, you should care about it for the sake of your business. Okay, forget the ethics, put those aside, but care about it because your business will suffer if you don't. So I'm going to quote some stats here for you. I'm not going to give you all of the sources for them because there's a lot of them and it will take time, but I'm happy to send those on afterwards as a separate thing with links in it if you need it. So 87% of global travellers say that they want to travel responsibly. That was according to a 2018 Sustainable Travel Report. However, 60% of them said they struggle to do so because they cannot find proper sustainable options. More than 2/3 of travellers, 68%, want to book things like eco accommodation, but they can't find any that actually suits them or is definitely eco-responsible, whatever word you want to call it. A 2016 Sustainable Travel International and Mandala research report revealed that eco-tourists tend to stay longer, they spend more money, and they believe they have a responsibility to respect their destination. In other words, they are exactly the kind of tourists that we want in an area. They're exactly the kind of tourists who are the nice ones to work with, the nice ones to deliver your tourism offering to. And according to a CNBC report last year, for travellers, eco-friendly tourism, responsible tourism is becoming a movement. It's not just one of those, oh yeah, it'd be nice to have. 93% of high-end Condé Nast traveller surveys we surveyed said that travel companies should and must be responsible for protecting their environment. They said that their hotel choices, for example, are influenced by the support that a hotel gives to the local community and the way it protects the environment. These numbers are all growing, but they're growing particularly among millennials. Millennials are more likely to support brands with strong management of the environment and social issues. And according to Credit Suisse, companies must deliver good social and environmental performance and engage in sustainable practices, or their future growth is at risk. And that's the key thing here. You don't have to care about the ethics, but you should care about your business. You should care about the survival of your business. And if you're not thinking about sustainability, if you're not thinking about behaving socially and environmentally responsible and catering to those tourists, then your business is likely to suffer. And on the plus side, people who want to find responsible tourism offerings, they are often very willing to pay more for that. And also, a research by the Future Foundation and Amadeus showed that by 2030, ethical travellers, those looking for ethics as they travel, they want to travel in an ethical, responsible way, they will make up a large proportion of the travellers that we'll see in the next sort of decade or so. And all of that's echoed, of course, by the 2019 State of the Food Travel Industry report, which was published by the World Food Travel Association, that found that 92% of respondents said that providing a sustainable experience was either important or very important to them. And yet, 38% think that food tourism is not, only 38% of them think that food tourism is doing a satisfactory job. So that's another 62% who think that we're failing, basically. Now that is not necessarily, doesn't have to be a problem, that can be a massive opportunity. So basically you need to think of it in terms of consumers are demanding a more responsible product, and it's our job to give it to them, either for ethical reasons because it's the right thing to do, or for pure business reasons because it means that we will increase our profits. Now, responsible tourism means many different things to many different people. If you ask, 10 people now, you probably get 10 completely different answers. And that is both a blessing and a curse. So it's a curse because it means that there are lots and lots of different things we need to do. It's a curse because we're going to feel like it's almost impossible to do everything. And in fact, it probably is impossible to do everything. And in fairness, it's definitely impossible to be perfect. We're probably never, ever going to be perfect. And you're never going to please everybody. However, it's a blessing because actually it means there are lots and lots of options. There are lots of opportunities to make changes and to be more responsible. So that means it's easy to get started. It's easy to make a real change. It's easy to tell your clientele about what you're doing, and it's easy to attract people and win them over with the actions because there are so many opportunities for you to do so. So let's focus on the blessing that this so many different things to so many different people gives us, rather than getting kind of wrapped up and despondent by the curse that we could ask that it is. So let's look at some of the things that you could do. Now, my suggestion would be start with the easy stuff. And I know that sounds really obvious, but I'm surprised often at how many people don't get started at all because they go, well, it's just too big. It's just too difficult. If I make this change, it's tiny. It's not going to make any difference. Every single change starts with somebody making a step, somebody going, yeah, I know the distance, the bit we want to get to in the end looks hard, but we will make a change and we will get there. Imagine if the suffragettes had just turned around and gone, oh, women's suffrage, that's going to be a tricky one, and not bothered. Women still wouldn't have the vote. Imagine if people campaigning to improve the quality of our air had every time said, well, that's just a really tiny change. What's the point? We'd still be fighting our way through toxic smog. So just be encouraged by the fact that every single action counts. Every step you take counts, and it's a step in the right direction. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to get moving. So if we take an example of, say, using a single-use plastic cups. Obviously, single-use plastic is a big issue at the moment and something we need to tackle. So if you, as part of your business, are using 100 of those a day, and you manage to reduce that just to 99 a day, that's a tiny, tiny reduction. In 100 days, you'll have saved a whole day's worth of those plastic cups. Now, that's great for the environment, but also think about it from your pocket. If those plastic cups cost you $30 a day to supply, that's $30 you've saved. By the end of the year, you've saved sort of $75 or so. And that's money I would much rather have in my pocket as a business rather than in the pocket of the people who produce the plastic cups. So don't think of it as, but it's tiny. Think of it as, yeah, everything is making a difference. For example, you could also offer people free water refills of their own plastic bottles rather than selling water in plastic bottles. Now you might think, yeah, but I make money from selling the water. Well, let me tell you the story of a drugstore in Wall, which is a tiny town in Pennington County in South Dakota. They built their entire business on offering free iced water. That business is now massive. It was a tiny, struggling drugstore. It is now huge. It's a multi-million-pound business. Millions of tourists visit, and basically they go there because of the whole story around the free water. But they went originally because it's free water, and then they bought an ice cream or a donut or stopped for a meal or bought some sandwiches. So doing things like that can actually build your business rather than make you worried about the fact that you're going to lose out on some profit. And once you start doing things, other people will follow. Also, you can make being sustainable actually kind of part of the fun of what your actual tourism offering is. So if we take the Christmas markets in Austria, when you visit a Christmas market, obviously you've got to have some Glühwein, clearly. When you buy the Glühwein, you'll pay an extra 2 to 4 euros per cup of Glühwein, which is a deposit on the mug that you drink it out of. When you finish, you take your mug back, they give you your 2 to 4 euros back. Now, equally, you can take the mug home as some kind of souvenir, and lots of people do it. It's a lovely way of remembering your time there. But those cups, rather than having loads of litter all over the place with plastic cups and things, you never see a cup anywhere because people know that it's worth money. And of course, they get used again and again and again. And because some get taken home by tourists, each year new ones come out, which makes it kind of part of the fun. But equally, the old ones are still being reused as well. So it's all part of the experience. Another hotel that's actually embraced the whole sustainability aspect of their food is Alt Hotels in Calgary in Canada. They do a really amazing picnic lunch, but rather than it being the usual picnic lunch wrapped up in plastic with plastic forks and plastic plates and cling film and all that kind of thing, they actually do theirs in proper glass bowls with proper cutlery. All of it's completely reusable. And at the end of the day, the tour driver for the tour that you're on will collect up all the waste that's produced at the end of the picnics that we've all had, and will take it back to the hotel for it to be reused. And from my point of view, I can say that picnic was one of the nicest because I ate it off a proper plate with a proper knife and fork, and it came in glass, not in cling film. So they made it part of what they do and made it part of something that I remember as my experience, part of something that I will talk about in a way that I probably don't talk about other picnics. On the theme of picnics, Hasness Country House in the Lake District in the UK, they also do picnics for walkers, but you pick the items you want in your picnic, so you're not just given food that you perhaps don't want to eat. So I'm not a big sandwich person, so putting sandwiches in my picnic is always going to end up being fed to the birds. And in addition, they make it really, really clear that you bring your own picnic box or your own kind of plastic tub, or whatever you want to call it, that you put your sandwiches or your picnic lunch into. So again, they're not producing additional plastic, it's saving and it's being reused. It's all part of the experience. And these things are really important because waste in an area could really, really blight the tourism destination. I visited St. Lucia a few years ago, and my overriding memory of the island is the amount of rubbish and waste lying around in the gutters, in the hedgerows, on the sides of the road. It completely blighted the place. That's what I remember about St. Lucia, not the beauty, which is the thing I should have been remembering about it. Other things you can do are things like take non-local food items off the menu, switch to local and seasonal food, add vegan dishes to the menu, and we'll talk more about that in a while. Avoid adding meat to absolutely everything if you possibly can. Buy organic, and you can therefore reduce the impact of pesticides and fertilizers on the environment. All of these things are things that you can do which will each, in a way, make its own difference. Also, talk to your suppliers. If you use fish in the menu, for example, talk to your supplier and check whether they're fishing sustainably, that they don't use dragnet fishing. If they use longline fishing, then is it albatross friendly? Do they avoid bycatch? Or do they only fish for fish that are currently not endangered due to overfishing? Ask the questions. If you're not asking the questions, then you are part of the problem still, because you're not taking responsibility. And they will carry on doing what they're doing, because if no one's asking them, why should they? But it means you can't go back to your tourists, your consumers, and say, we're doing something, because you're not. The same applies for fair trade and things like that. You know, are your suppliers paying a fair price to their workers? Are they providing them with schooling? Do they involved in forced labour or child labour? Check what they're doing. Again, ask the question. It's really, really important. And while you're asking them the question, you kind of have to ask yourself the same question as well, because it's not just about the suppliers, it's about what you do as well. So behaving responsibly basically means it does mean what it says on the tin. It means taking responsibility for the impact that you have. Now, some people worry that what this also means is, oh yeah, it can be nice and kind of hippie, but it can't really be luxury. And I tell you, that's not the case. Behaving responsibly absolutely can be done hand in hand with amazing luxurious experiences. So if we take Playa Cativo, which is in Costa Rica, this is a very high-end luxury resort. Caters only for a very small handful of guests each time. You can only reach there by private boat. It's a pretty amazing place to visit. And yet their whole offering is based around sustainability. And for example, you're not allowed to use hairdryers, and all the bed linen is not ironed. Now you might think, well, that doesn't really fit with luxury, but because they're very good at communicating that information, so there's a note explaining to me why my bed linen isn't ironed, and there's a note explaining to me why there's no hairdryer in the room and why I shouldn't use my own. That helps you buy into it and understand, and it educates you as well about the impact of high use or high energy use items like hairdryers and irons. So they get all their water from their own private kind of hydro dam, which is a little river next to the resort, and that's why they need to make sure that they save on energy all the time. So that's educated me about the impact of energy, but also left me feeling good about the changes that they're making, rather than me feeling like somehow I'm being deprived of everything. Training is another part of it as well. So for example, Accor hotels have a very good training program which teaches staff how to recognise if a traveller in the hotel might actually be there to engage in child sex tourism. They can spot these people because they're trained to do so, and that then helps the local police clamp down on paedophiles and hopefully arrest people and stop that kind of thing happening. That's great publicity for them that they do that, and equally it puts off the wrong kind of traveller, so it has a double whammy. So you may be sitting there thinking, yeah, that's all very nice, but actually things like that have nothing to do with me. I offer food. I'm not involved in rooms for paedophiles or anything horrible like that. But the truth is, your food tourism business is more than just the food that you put on consumers' plates. It's the entire business. It's everything that you do in the back end. It's the way you treat your staff, the way you train your staff. It's everything about the business. So don't just look at it as it's about my food. You need to look at it about the whole business. So for example, you could hardly say you were a responsible fair trade business if you were exploiting your own staff. You could hardly say that you were animal cruelty, that you didn't engage in animal cruelty, or that you were vegan if actually in the background you were off doing trophy hunting. Or you couldn't really claim to be an organic restaurant if actually all your cleaning products were full of chemicals and weren't organic. So you have to look at it from the whole aspect of your entire business. Now let's move to meat. So meat is unfortunately one aspect of food tourism that it is the most damaging and the most socially irresponsible part of food tourism. We already know that our current levels of meat consumption are unsustainable, that the planet simply can't support all of us and all of the livestock that we need to continue to eat meat at the current level that we know that we're currently eating it. We just can't do it. And we also know that it's not particularly good for our health either. Meat is an incredibly inefficient food, and that's part of the reason why it's so unsustainable. Research shows that if we were all to stop eating meat and dairy, and I know that's not going to happen, but just go with me for a second, that if we were to stop eating meat and dairy, that global farmland use could be reduced by more than 75%. Now that's an area equivalent to the US, China, the European Union, and Australia combined. Now imagine if all that area were taken away from the production of meat and dairy, what our planet would look like, how amazing that would be. Meat production is also the leading cause of the current mass extinction of wildlife. Meat and dairy provide just 37% of our protein, 18% of our calorific intake, and yet it uses the majority, 83% of farmland, and produces 60% of agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions globally. A study by the University of Oxford said, was published in the journal Science, looked at 40,000 farms in 119 countries and covering 40 food products that basically represent about 90% of all the food that is eaten, and assessed the full impact of these foods from farm to fork on land use, on climate change emissions, freshwater pollution, etc. And it came to the conclusion that a vegan diet is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth. It has a far bigger impact than cutting down on your flights, for example, which is the thing we normally talk about in relation to tourism. Not saying we shouldn't cut back on our flights, but when you put that into context, it shows that that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the food that we're eating. So if we cut back on the amount of meat that we offer in our food tourism offerings, then actually that's one of the ways we can have the single biggest, quickest and easiest impact. But the problem is that we're not doing very well at it. But it really is worth thinking about. It is worth remembering these figures because, for example, I'm vegan, I don't eat meat, and I hardly eat any dairy. I'm almost vegan, I guess, if I'm being absolutely honest. But my impact on the planet is still smaller than the average meat eater. So that's with all the flying that I do, and I fly a lot, I'm still have a smaller impact on the planet than a meat eater who doesn't fly at all. That is a stat that's kind of worth remembering. And even if we look at the lowest possible impact of beef, for example, beef that's farmed organically and is free range, it is still responsible for 6 times more greenhouse gas emissions and 36 more times land use than if we were growing protein-rich pulses. Talking of which, 90% of the world's soya beans that are grown, with the worldwide crop, 50% of the grain, and 40% of the fish that we catch are actually all used to feed livestock to produce meat for human consumption. So imagine if that 90% of soya went direct to humans rather than through animals, if 50% of the grain direct to humans, 40% of the fish direct to humans. What a massive, massive environmental difference that would make. For example, it does take around about 2,500 gallons of water, 12 pounds of grain and 35 pounds of topsoil, and the energy equivalent of a gallon of gasoline to produce 1 pound of beef, just 1 pound. It's a little bit less for pork and chicken, but it's still not a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's really where we should be going. And that is why more and more consumers, for a variety of reasons, some of them ethical, some of them environmental, some of them about animal welfare, but more and more people are looking to cut back and reduce the amount of meat that they're eating. And in fact, according to a Nielsen study, around 14% of the world's population identifies as vegetarian. But if we then add in vegans and flexitarians, in other words, people who are eating meat still, but are actively cutting back on the amount of meat that they're eating and actively looking for vegan and vegetarian alternatives, then that's 31% of the global population. Now, that's a lot of people cutting back on meat. And if you're not serving those people, then you're missing out on the money that they have in their pockets. And even for people who wouldn't identify with any of those labels, they don't see themselves as vegan, vegetarian, or even flexitarian, they're just a meat eater, even those people, there is a massive, massive shift towards just cutting back a little bit, having 1 or 2 vegetarian meals a week, trying to reduce the amount of meat that's on their plate. And we need to think of these as all of these things that people are making these changes. It's like a continuum. They're gradually making the change from one end of the continuum to the other. And the biggest change we're seeing is amongst the millennials. And of course, these are the people who will be spending money in the future and will be the ones that will sustain your business long after oldies like me have long gone. So you want to be catering for those people. If you're not catering from them, then you're not just damaging your future environmentally, but you're also definitely damaging it environmentally. Now, before you're sitting there going, I really don't want to hear this, and you know, I don't like this woman, and you start trolling me on Twitter and all that kind of stuff, let me just really make something clear. I am not saying that you should ditch all meat from all meals. and that every food tourism experience must be vegan. I am not saying that, right? So let's get that really, really clear. But what I am saying is that you need to cater for these people, and you need to think about how the food that you are producing and serving is having an impact on the environment. And that one way of doing that and reducing that impact is to increase the number of vegan options that you have on your menu, because that will cater for those people, which brings you new customers, and it will also cut down on your CO2 emissions and your impact on the environment. So let me tell you a little bit about what it is like to travel as a non-meat eater. And the headline news is, it's great. I very seldom come back from a trip abroad raving about the food. Very, very seldom. And that's a real shame, because food should be part of the enjoyment of a trip. But actually, I have to find my enjoyment with everything else, because the food generally is not great. So you may remember this little clip, or this still rather, from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And Tula takes her fiance Ian to meet her mother and the rest of the family. And she says to her mother, "Oh, Ian's a vegetarian." And the mother goes, "Oh, he doesn't eat any meat." She goes, "No, he doesn't eat any meat." And so the mother goes, "Oh, don't worry, I make you lamb." That is what being a vegetarian or a vegan is like when you travel. People really, they don't understand, they don't want to understand, it feels like, and they won't cater for you. They want to kind of, well, they either don't want to cook for you at all, or they want to kind of force meat on you. So from my point of view, I find it very, very difficult often to find any kind of meal that actually caters for me. 9 times out of 10, no matter what country I visit, the one vegetarian or vegan option is risotto, which doesn't really give me much of a gastronomic experience or a taste of the particular country, unless perhaps I'm in Italy. The other one is all very, very frequently am served the same meal as the meat eater, but just with the meat taken off. Well, again, that's hardly a gastronomic experience. Hardly makes me feel as though you thought about what I want to eat or care about the experience that I'm having with the food. I've also had it where I've ordered something which I've been told was vegetarian, to find that it has meat in it, and been then told, yeah, it's a tiny bit of meat, doesn't count. Yeah, it does count. Imagine if I had an anaphylactic reaction to peanuts and you said, yeah, but it's a tiny bit of peanuts. You wouldn't do that to somebody, so don't do that with the meat eating either. Or my biggest bugbear actually is having no choice. So when we travel, in fact, whenever we eat out and we want to spend money on food in an eating out experience, whatever that experience is, we go because we want to have a choice. We want to be offered something that we maybe wouldn't be able to get at home. And yet, as a vegan or a vegetarian, if I am offered an option, it's usually one. And that to me isn't what I want when I don't think it's what anybody wants when they go out to eat, to be told you're eating this, whether you like it or not, that's what you're eating. And that is what my experience is. And that doesn't leave me feeling good about a particular country. Occasionally I might get a really great meal, but very often it is mediocre because clearly it hasn't been thought about. So if you are going to offer, well, in fact, not if, you really should be offering meat-free options, you need to think about them, and you need to make sure that it's not just one option, there's a number of options. And so, for example, when I travel, I usually go self-catering, so you're missing out on all that money that's in my pocket that I'm not spending with you. I avoid restaurants, I avoid food experiences. I often bring food from the UK if I have to, and if I do find a place that does cater to me, then I may well end up eating there every night and every lunchtime as well. So in Rockland in Maine that I visited recently, I ate at the same restaurant for every single meal because it was the only restaurant in town where I actually got some choice about the things that I could eat. So is gastronomy important to me just because I don't eat meat? Yes, of course it's important to me. Is it satisfactory? No, it's not a satisfactory experience. And don't forget, that's not just me either. It's also the people I'm traveling with. The people I'm traveling with are not going to say, I'll tell you what, Chantal, you sit outside or we'll go in the restaurant and have a meal. That's not going to happen. They are also going to eat in the same restaurant as I am. So you're not just missing out on my money, you're missing out on their money as well. So what can you do? Right. Well, I would say the key thing is to offer a range of dishes on your menu that are meat-free. Ideally, if you make them dairy-free as well, then you're catering also for people who are lactose intolerant, people who are looking to watch their weight, and for vegans at the same time. So it doesn't mean you have to have lots of different things on the menu that then gets very, very complicated. If you kind of go straight for the vegan option, then actually you're going to cover lots of bases all in one go, which can make it much, much easier for you and more enjoyable for people who are traveling as well. Things you can do is I would look at some of the traditional meat dishes and see whether you can change them and adapt them. So for example, a meat-free moussaka could be made with green lentils instead of with meat, or you could load up your paella with lots and lots of roasted vegetables rather than putting seafood into it. Cook a tagine, don't put the lamb in at all, just cook it with the vegetables and the fruit and soya and so on. Don't sprinkle bacon over every single salad you make. Don't use anchovies, instead maybe use soya sauce or salt or something. In other words, there are easy ways of adapting dishes that already have meat in them. The other thing you can do, of course, is use your imagination. So, you know, your food is your passion. Look at some of the different things that you can make. This slide shows you there are so many foods. In fact, there are far more vegetables, fruits and pulses than there are meat options. So this is a real smorgasbord of choice of amazing things that you can cook. So let your imagination, your creativity run free. How about developing a signature dish, which is a vegan dish? This has worked really well for a number of food businesses. So for example, Vonne, which is in Berlin, they do an amazing vegan doner kebab. It's the full-on doner kebab experience, just without the animal flesh. That place is packed. People queue down the streets to get it. That's all they offer. And as I said, it is packed out. They can't keep up with demand, and it's delicious. Greggs in the UK, not generally known for its gastronomy, but as an example, they launched the vegan sausage roll earlier this year. They cannot keep up with demand. They put it in the shops in the morning, sold out. They just cannot keep up with demand. And overall, since the launch of that vegan sausage roll, they've seen an overall increase in sales in Greggs across the UK of 14%, because people are coming in to try the vegan sausage roll, or because they are vegan and that's what they can get, and then they buy a coffee or a tea or something and whatever to go with it. Renegade Kitchen is a very small street food business in Wales, and they every now and again do a special kind of Sunday roast where they do a no pork belly, or a no pork stuffed pork belly thing. Can't remember the exact title, but basically it's kind of like a full roast Sunday lunch, but it's completely vegan. And every time they do that, totally sold out, rammed to the rafters. And it's an amazing experience. So if you're not catering for people, as I said, and I'm not saying you have to go 100% vegan, but if you're not catering for these people, then actually you are literally leaving money on the table. You are missing out. Now, really, really important is, if you're going to do this, and I said I recommend that you do, you also have to think about telling them what you're doing. Because if you don't tell people, then how are they supposed to know? I will not go into your restaurant if you don't tell me that you cater for vegans. And just saying we cater for vegans, but not telling me what the food is not going to work. I don't choose food just so that it fills up my belly and I have enough calories to get through the day. The whole thing about food tourism is, of course, the experience. I want you to sell me that food. Tell me how delicious it's going to be. Let me know what's in it. Give me some choices. Show me pictures. Don't just tell me, yeah, we can adapt it for your diet. Yeah, come in and we'll cook you something. That's not how it works. And that will not get me into your restaurant. So sell me the food in the same ways you would sell the food to anybody else who also ate meat. Also, don't hide the menu. The number of times I've gone to a restaurant and not realised they have a completely separate vegetarian menu because no one has ever told me. How am I supposed to know? So you have to tell people. If you're going to make the most of this and make money out of it, then make it clear. Put it on the menu in the window. Explain what the options are. Don't just say you have them. Sell those options to me. Put it on your website. Shout about it on social media. Tell them how you're being socially responsible. Not just about the vegan options, but all the other things that you're doing. Tell me. If you don't tell me, I don't know. If I don't know, you're not standing out from the competition, and I can't make a choice to spend my money with you. So the communication aspect of it is absolutely essential. I cannot stress that enough. Cannot stress it enough. So to conclude, what are some of the takeaways that I can give you as a result of this talk? Well, briefly, I think hopefully I've made the point that the desire to travel responsibly and to be more sustainable, and the need for operators to be responsible and sustainable, is on the increase. People want it. That's what we have to give them. An easy way to make your food offering more responsible and attract more and new customers is to offer meat and dairy-free options. I emphasize, it doesn't mean going 100%, but does mean offering choice, not just one, and it does mean telling people about it. Give people something for them to rave about, something that's a bit different, some reason I would go back and go, whoa, that was an amazing meal. that was something that was incredible, something that I wanted to photograph and post on Instagram, basically. So tell people about it. Essentially, what I'm really saying is, don't make it difficult for me. Don't make me fight for my food. Make it easy for me to spend money with you. Make it easy for me to choose you, and make it easy for me to recommend you. And if you can do that, you will hit those kind of two birds with one stone, if pardon the pun, in that you will have a more sustainable business, you will attract more people, and you will be protecting your business both socially and environmentally, but also financially for the future. Thank you very much.
Chantal, that was fantastic. Thank you. You never cease to amaze me how much you know and how many stories you have to share. Can you tell people, share the experience that we had in Greece together? Because what really hit me when we had dinner together in Greece was the fact that there were so many fantastic vegetarian dishes available in Greece, but they weren't being offered. And you explained to the waiter. Well, you tell the story.
Okay, I'll tell the story. Right, so as you say, we've gone out for dinner. There's a number of dishes that they're bringing up and so on, all of which are meat. So I asked the waitress if they've got something that's vegetarian. She comes back and I get the usual response, which is you can have risotto or pasta. Neither of which I think is as much of a, well, certainly in Greece, it's not the kind of gastronomic experience I'm looking for. And it's not really what I wanted either. Fortunately, we were both sitting on a table actually with somebody who knew the owner of the restaurant and was fluent in Greek, and therefore was able to speak to the owner of the restaurant and said, look, can't you cook her this, this, and this? And he had some ideas, which was also very helpful. That then meant that the chef went off and he made a selection of the most amazing vegetables and other vegetarian dishes that were really typically Greek and were perfect for us to eat. And I remember that you and I tucked our way into all of these, and everybody else was looking and going, can I have some of that? We're like, no, keep hands off, this is for us. And so all the meat eaters were looking at those meals going, these look way better. But the sad thing about it was that had it not been for the fact that someone on our table actually, was fluent in Greek and knew the chef and the owner, we would never have experienced that. I'd have ended up with a rather boring plate of pasta, and I'd have gone home going, food in Greece is a bit rubbish, isn't it? And yet it doesn't have to be. That was the point. And the meat eaters were envious.
Yeah. And in your presentation also, you showed on the screen, I don't know, 10, 20 different dishes that were vegetarian Greek dishes, but you just, there was a carrot one I remember, and I like carrots, but I don't think I've ever seen that on a menu anywhere. And it's the kind of thing where it just someone needs to think, oh, wow, we actually have other things that aren't meat that we can put out there. So this is the time for anyone to ask questions of Chantal, if there's any questions, ideas you have. And I think that the real takeaway for me here is that being responsible can be a USP for business, your unique selling proposition. Everyone's looking at ways to compete, how to be more clever, how to be more competitive, how to outdo your competitor down the street. But the simple act of being socially responsible is a unique selling proposition.
Yeah. And that, of course, is kind of the irony of it. We think of it as a problem. We think of it as something that's going to cost us money. But actually, it is exactly the kind of thing that will differentiate you from the competition. And certainly, okay, on that kind of continuum we were talking about earlier in the talk, yes, I might be right at one end in terms of, I'm vegan and I look very specifically for things that are socially responsible. But everybody else is somewhere on that continuum, with very few people right at the end going, I don't care about any of it at all. So if I've got the choice, even if I weren't right at the far end of it, if I had the choice of going, there are two products here, one is socially responsible and looks lovely, and the other one is not socially responsible and looks lovely, and I had that choice, most people would choose to be socially and environmentally responsible. People don't actively go out there and say, how can I hurt other people? How can I damage the environment? How can I abuse animals? Most people would prefer not to be doing that. But the trouble is, they don't find it easy. So yes, absolutely, it can be a USP, and you'll pay more for it.
And we have a question here. What are 3 things that you would like to eat or find on a hotel breakfast buffet?
I love a cooked breakfast. I really do like a cooked breakfast. And I know that's a bit of a British thing. So I guess vegetarian sausages, those sorts of things would be good. And a good choice of other vegetables to go with a cooked breakfast, so mushrooms, grilled tomatoes, and those kinds of things. Because then I can make up my cooked breakfast with beans and stuff without having to worry about the fact that there is no, I'm not putting a sausage on there, or meat sausage on, I'm not putting bacon on. So that would be one thing. Another one would be some other choices than cheese. I find that a lot of breakfast buffets, there's lots and lots of cheese, and but there's not a lot of other protein options for a vegan or a vegetarian. So I think fruit and those kind of things are lovely, but there are some amazing vegan yogurts that you can get which are made from a coconut base, and those sorts of things would be really good on a vegan buffet, because then I could have, you know, vegan yogurt and some fruit or something on top of it as well. So that would be a good thing. More often as well, having some choice of vegan milks, whether that's for my tea or coffee or to put over my cereal. So those sorts of things are the kind of things that I would really like to see on a on a breakfast buffet with some vegan options.
One of the things I've noticed, a lot of breakfast buffets will serve fruit, but it's fruit you don't want to eat. And the meat part, you know, the sausages or the eggs or whatever always look better. And it's fruit that's either really old or not ripe. My favorite one is the pieces of melon that they cut around the edges of the inside of the melon, the really bitter hard part. And I just want to go up to them and say, look at this. Would you be happy eating this? How about some ripe fruit? How about some tasty fruit? You know, and I don't know why that fruit is so hard to work out.
No, I don't know why either. And also, to be honest, I want it prepared for me as well. I don't want to have to pick up an apple and a pear and a banana and a something else, peel it, chop it up, put it in my bowl. It's like, you know, there's almost nothing more attractive than a big bowl of really colourful fruit salad. So put that there. And that does, I mean, that will cater for the vegans, for the vegetarians, for people with special dietary needs. There's not many people who don't eat fruit, people cutting back on their weight and so on, cutting back on fat. You know, it's one of those things that's an easy win that you can tick lots of boxes with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too that you definitely hit the nail on the head there with having it done for you. I mean, I am not paying for breakfast for the privilege of going in to cut the apple myself. You know, I want you to get out the brown bits of the apple. I want you to present it to me, maybe with some nuts, maybe with some raisins around it. You know, make it presentable, make it a dish. Now, here we have another comment. Great as usual. I think you need to add one more thing to your comparison. Responsible, not responsible. Here choice is simple, but you should add price. If you add your responsible dish cost times X percent, what is your thought how much people are still willing to pay for a responsible meal?
Okay, so there's two bits here. I think I don't know an exact figure of what people are prepared to pay for a responsible meal, but they will pay extra, and certainly all the research does support that they will pay extra for a responsible meal. But they have to understand why it's responsible and what's responsible about it, because I think we're all a bit sick of the whole greenwashing thing. Going, oh yes, this comes from a sustainable resource, or you know, this was, I don't know, whatever label you want to put on it. I want to know that it definitely is. Is it certified as being responsible? In what way is it responsible or sustainable? So I think people will pay more with the more information that you're able to give them. If you just give it some kind of greenwash label and expect them to pay an extra couple of dollars for it, I don't think it's going to happen. The other thing to remember as well is that generally speaking, vegan meals and vegetarian meals are cheaper to produce than meat meals. So if I compare the cost of, for example, a vegetarian moussaka or a vegetarian paella, the cost in comparison to making that with meat, whether it's seafood for the paella or beef or whatever for the moussaka, compared to putting it with roasted vegetables for the paella and lentils for the moussaka, it is considerably cheaper. We are talking, you know, if you're orders of magnitude cheaper actually. So if you think that you're maybe charging $12 or $13 for a dish or something like that, actually the profit margin on a vegetarian or vegan dish is going to be considerably greater than the profit margin on a meat dish. So therefore, you can actually knock $1 off and still make more money. And if you can knock $1 off and encourage more people to eat it, A, you're being more sustainable, but actually the proportion of your profit is going to increase. So I think it's both about people will pay a little bit more, but actually it's about the fact you can make more profit out of it as well.
Okay, I think that's fantastic. Well, we need to wrap up now, but Chantal, thank you for your words of wisdom. Really enjoyed listening to you, and I can tell our audience did as well. Thank you very much. And for everyone listening in today, we will be starting the next session in 13 minutes. And remember, it is at a different URL. Each session takes place at a different URL, so consult your Excel spreadsheet for the next session. And we'll go ahead and stop the recording.